So next one is DHCP, and as I said, this is one of my favorite ones of Server 2012. You kind of go DHCP, oh God, it's scope, configure it, scope options, sucks, leave me alone. If you want to introduce link, oh no, I have to do some very fun stuff with vendor things. And I have to ask something, don't you like the new transitions in PowerPoint 2013? Don't they rock? Anyway, sorry, how sad. But anyway, so the DHCP, so one of the things I like about Server 2012 DHCP is DHCP policy-based assignment. And then the second one I love is the DHCP failover. And the part of the reasons why I like them is that it just makes it easier. I don't have to use Cisco, like go back and use the Cisco network access products and have those centrally managed or things like that. I can use this in great effect. I can have different IP pools carved up. I don't have to have multiple different scopes and hopefully on different subnets and block DHCP broadcast messages and all this really complicated stuff if you're not allowed to touch it, as I'm not from Microsoft. So I'm not allowed to touch the network anymore. When I was a consultant, I was allowed to touch the network and I got my hands dirty. So I wanted an option that will actually help me. And this is where these two particular things come in. So a policy-based assignment, and we're going to demo it in a second, but policy-based assignment is take the fact that you could assign it based on a MAC address from a specific pool. Or your HP Jet Direct cards, wouldn't it be nice that they all came from the same subnet rather than multiple different subnets no matter where? Wouldn't it be nice if your DHCP relay were always going to assign your Jet Direct cards from one specific subnet or one specific element of subnet? So if you were really good at your network administration, you'd take a /24 or 254 addresses, and you'll always assign the first 50 addresses for servers, the next 50 addresses for clients, the next 50 servers for network devices. But you had to go off and configure that manually and hope to God that the guy who was coming in behind you would follow the same principles. Or then suddenly reverse the whole thing and then you'd be confused. With policy-based assignments, you can actually pre-configure this. So even with DHCP, the way you like your network can be configured will be followed. DHCP failover, and this we'll go specifically into this in a second. But I just want to ask a very basic question. How many people did split scope here to try and, or cluster DHCP servers? No? 1, 2, 3. Split scope. Pain for those who configured it. If you don't have if you haven't got it configured, I suggest a great Friday night activity. Go home and configure split scope. No? My kids need to grow up then. So, with the policy-based assignments, specifically, you can include like a MAC address, a vendor class, a user class, and you can get familiar with these particular options, even with a relay client ID. So if it's becoming from a specific part of the subnet, you can get it assigned to a specific part of the scope. That's really cool, and we're going to go into that in a bit more detail in a second. We're just going to show you. With the failover, we've got two specific modes of operation. One of them is load balancing. Yay, no more split scopes. You don't have to configure 80% on one side, 20% on the other. So that the whole purpose is that if one DHCP server goes down, that the other side can start assigning. Oh crap, I didn't have access list for the other side of the scope. Now I have a problem. Or you can have hot standby. So with hot standby, that's just a standard DHCP cluster, but it's not actually a cluster because you don't need to go and install the cluster role. You don't need to set up all those wonderful bits and pieces. You just set up 2 servers. And we'll show you this in a second. Excuse me. One thing that I'll mention, I suppose, in the load balancing mode, both servers answer the DHCP request. Okay? So between different computational stuff in terms of, and it generates a particular hash, one server will answer, and then the databases will synchronize. I had great fun putting the demo for this together, especially when it came to policies and I forgot to synchronize the databases because I was trying to do it too quick, and I was wondering why one side of the servers was assigning a policy and the other wasn't. And I'll show you in a second, but it was one of those things. So do you think this would be a useful feature in your enterprise? DHCP failover? I really do think so. So let's see. I think it's demo time already. It's fantastic. Love demos. I promised the IPAM demo will be slow. So let me just close these down. So again, I already have a DHCP server on this network, but for the purposes of today, I killed it off create 2 new DHCP servers. I'm going to go walk through how to create a scope. So you just see here we have DHCP1, DHCP2. So what you'll see is nothing specifically insane. Install the DHCP role very quickly. Hopefully you can all do that and select an add wizard and run through a wizard. And then you get into the same sort of stuff here. But the interesting part of it is around configuring failover. So we'll create a quick demo scope just to show. See, excuse me, new demo scope. So we just go test 2. We go 10.10.10.1 and 10.10.10.254. 255. So just make it a class C or a 24-bit. So I'm just not going to configure any of your options just to be quick about it. You don't really need to. So now, so we have that scope there. And we'll just pretend to activate it for a minute. I'll turn it off in a second. So now if we go back to DHCP2, just to show you, server manager. So now you'll see DHCP2, but you will not see, what you will see is the scope for the one that we've already configured, just to show you in a few seconds, but not the other one, which is a bit of a pain because this is supposed to be DHCP failover. And if it didn't have a structure to this demo, I would actually be a bit embarrassed right now. But I do. So what you do, configure failover. So you don't have to enable all your scopes to be highly available, which is kind of cool because I mightn't want all my scopes to be highly available. I only want a test scope or something, or I mightn't be able to make a scope highly available because the routing throughout the network mightn't be configured to support it, or the helper addresses mightn't be in place and so on and so forth. So we can configure failover. So what scopes do you want to make highly available? So if there was more than one, it'll allow me to select them all. What do you want the partner services to be? Well, actually I don't know the name. So that's what's in my authorized list. So you can straight away, without kind of any major science or science degree or kind of political degree, you can actually start configuring this pretty straightforwardly. So we want the authorized server of 2. Click next. Reuse existing failover relations configured if anything. So I already have a relationship, so it's just going to reuse that. It knows about it. Maximum client lead time. So let's just, this is just going to give me options around how I'm going to load balance between the two. Will one server take 50% of the requests or 75%? And you can go modify this if you want. I'm just going to leave it at 50% because that's what I started earlier on. But the maximum client lead time is the amount of time that it will detect that if a DHCP goes down before the partner DHCP server will actually take active control over the lease. So an hour, that's not so bad. Like generally your lease, if you're one of those poor unfortunate people that falls within inside that hour, which is rare because most of the time when a DHCP renews, it'll just renew the same IP address in almost 98.9% of the cases, something to that effect. But 1 hour to detect a failover. If in that case a new device comes onto the network, the other server is still going to serve it and still going to give a DHCP lease. It's just that the databases won't be synced. But when that other DHCP server comes back up, the DHCP lease will be synced and all will be glorious and happy in your network again. So just click next. Could not do that. It's not that embarrassing of a question. My point being is that it is that simple to configure DHCP failover. So do 2 DHCP servers with 0 configuration, and within kind of 2 or 3 minutes, I can have failover between my scopes. So you can imagine doing your migration in terms of your scopes that in terms of your DHCP servers that you have in your 2003 or 2008 or 2 environments, or 2008 environments. I don't know why I skipped over that one. But you can imagine doing them and how quickly and easily you can make a highly available scope with inside VMs, if you want. And I think that's the real point. So let's go into a little bit more. There is a migration scenario to it. It's well documented on our really exceptionally good TechNet. If if you find a documentation bug, please let us know. No, there is supported migration scenarios that you can do it, so don't worry. Most of the time it's about exporting the scope and bringing it back into the new DHCP servers. And then hoping to God your clients at one point actually realize that they've done a DHCP broadcast to the new DHCP server. There's a few teething problems that can happen, but it's like any DHCP server migration, to be honest with you. It's just making sure that the broadcast goes in the right particular direction and that it's relayed correctly. So, so just before I break anything, I'm just going to deactivate this scope because I just wanted to show you how easy it was to configure. And I'll just delete it out before it gives any leases. Oh, sorry. Deconfigure. Yay. So simple enough. So what I want you to kind of see here, so you'll see here, take the unique IDs, take the MAC addresses, and a few bits and pieces, and we'll just scroll down. So when we go over right to the corner, and I'll scroll back up here, and I do apologize. You'll see a field called policy. Okay, and let's explore this a little bit more. So you scroll down here, and you'll see a thing called Contoso, because we love Contoso. It's one of our demo companies, and we're forced to use it as Microsoft employees. So with Contoso, we have a policy called Contoso, and where it's actually configured is configured directly on the scope. So you scroll up here. I see Contoso demo scope. So this is the policy-based administration we were talking to you a few minutes ago about. So the ability to take like a layer of MAC addresses or a vendor class or something that you might have that's prevalent in your network, and being able to sign from the specific DHCP scope a range, always from a specific range. So what I did in this case was I created a simple, and I'll run through the creation of one in a second, but I'll just show you what I have configured. So what I did was I can have a special lease. So if it's like a wireless access point which you want that's going to be random around the network, you might keep the lease low. If it's something else, like a test server or something, you might keep the lease low. But otherwise, keep it at your 8-day lease. If you know the conditions in your network, it's fine. So in this case, what I did was specify that I want a MAC address. And you can see straight away that I use wildcards. So I only match part of the MAC address. So can anyone recognize what type of MAC address this is? I'm expecting at least one person. And if they don't, I'm going to laugh at them. It's Hyper-V MAC address. Well, you answered, so I'll laugh at Aidan instead. So my point is that inside my virtual network, I want them assigned from a specific IP range. So you will find that if you go to all my VMs from my that I've created in the last couple of days that will take a DHCP address, they'll always be from a specific part of the scope. Always. And the physical machines will be different. So come up with your own concoctions on how you want to do it. That's just for this particular purpose. But if you click Add, you'll see these are the particular options. So you can have your vendor class or your user class if you have something that will actually transmit that type of information inside the DHCP broadcasts. And you can have a look at what's transmitted if you're any way familiar with Wireshark or Network Monitor. Whatever floats your boat. Yeah, you can decide what suits yourself. NetSH is very good as well for collecting CAP files, so it's up to yourself. But specifically, like I had MAC address, so no big deal. Choose your poison and use it specifically, and then configure it up. Use wildcards just because it makes it easier, and then you set your conditions of whether it's equal or not, and so on and so forth. And then you can have multiple combinations, so you can sort of say, well, if it's a JetDirect card and it's from this MAC address because or address identified to a specific vendor, unless you buy it from China, and then you could get anyone's MAC address. So be careful. But my point being is that you can make these decisions. You can then start assigning from a particular parts of the network, which is here. So for example, I'm decided for these particular VMs and for these particular things, I want to assign 40 from a range of 40 addresses at the bottom end of the scope, because I always want to know that that part of the scope is my VM address range. Always. So I don't even have to think about it. If I see an IP address or I do a ping of Contoso FSO1, I know fine well it's a VM by just looking at its IP address, or its IPv4 address, because God knows I can't read IPv6 yet. And again, you can add additional scopes if you want, or modify it out. You can make it larger and shorter, because we really thought about it this time, and now you can extend the range, whereas you couldn't previously. So you can do it. So it's up to you. Set your options as before. So if, for example, those particular IP ranges needed to use a different gateway, that would be useful. In many cases, I did come across many networks in my consultant days where I had to route traffic to somewhere in Europe from one set of machines, and then traffic somewhere else in another set of machines, but they wouldn't let me use one centralized gateway. They wanted me to use multiple different gateways. And then they wanted to be able to route in every single direction from other machines. So, having these kind of options and these kind of things. So, DHCP becomes a problem. Scripting then to put in static routes and so on and so forth becomes a different layers of issues. So, the fact that you can configure it and have them from different blocks and so on and so forth, it makes it a little bit easier. And then usual DHCP stuff that if you want to kind of enable dynamic DNS and things like that, to update your DNS as you go along, which is kind of cool. So, to be honest with you, really quickly, it's test, same options, put in your conditions, your vendor class equals whatever. Let's just do that just for an example. I have nothing to assign, so I want to assign it from a 192.168.199. It has to be from within inside the scope, and as you see straight there, the current IP scope is that. So let's say 100 to 199, 150. I'm not going to configure any options. Next, done. Okay, and it's straight away is enabled. Now, if I have anything that meets those Windows 2000 option conditions, they will start being assigned a policy, as you'll see from over here. And again, just to prove the pudding, so you'll see the policy. I don't have it as test, but just let's take there. So roughly there, Contoso FS is 0155. You'll see it's 200, and these are physical servers here, the HV 10, 4, and so on and so forth. And they're not physical servers, so they come from a different part of the range. Okay? Make sense? Any questions? Fantastic. Do you all want to run now and deploy DHCP failover? No? That's a shame. Anyway, so you can do the same for IPv6, but as I say, my IPv6, I can tell you a lot about IPv6, but ask me how to configure it and actually do the site local addresses and things like that. Yeah, I'm going to get very confused very quickly. So we'll leave it alone for today, but generally IPv6 auto-configures itself in 90% of the cases, thankfully. And it's got billions of addresses.